There aren't too many animes that break the mold and change the public's idea of what an anime can be. While I'm no expert or connoisseur of anime, it's interesting how a soundtrack, which is predominantly jazz, can influence the artwork, changes people's concept of music and space, and have a lasting effect on people. Welcome to the channel, I'm Melodic Sound Quest, and today we're going to be looking at the music of Cowboy Bebop. Let's get into it. The history and development of Cowboy Bebop has some interesting roots. While the show was originally pitched by the toy company Bandai, at the time there had been a renaissance for sci-fi with the release of Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. There had been a bit of a boom for Star Wars toys and figurines. Bandai wanted some of the action, so they contacted Shinichiro Watanabe with the aim of him making an anime to sell model spaceships. At the time, Watanabe had worked on a handful of shows prior to Cowboy Bebop. However, his most well-known work for this period would have been the show Macross Plus, a film which was based on another planet with robot spaceships. Yeah, so sci-fi? Watanabe had been signed the director for the show, however he's been quoted saying that Shoji Kawamori was really the main director for the show. He said due to this, he felt he didn't really have the freedom to push ideas and concepts. Watanabe was eager, and he was eager to sink his teeth into his own project. And Bandai, well, as long as it could sell modelled spaceships in space, Watanabe had full creative license. That didn't last. Things soured, and Bandai dropped the project after reviewing the concepts for the starships. Bandai at the time had felt it wouldn't be able to sell the spaceships to the public. It ain't gonna happen, kid. We can't sell the goods. However, luckily, a subsidiary for Bandai, Bandai Visual, agreed to fund the project. So at the time, Watanabe had organised a fairly unheard composer, Yoko Kanno. Yoko had just finished working with Watanabe on Macross Plus, where she had written and scored the soundtrack. Yoko had grown up from humble beginnings, where she first experienced playing music on the organ at church and writing original music on her parents' piano. Her love for the arts extended beyond music and included literature. She later went on to study literature at university. However, at university she spent most of her time playing in bands and transcribing music. This all led to opportunities to write music for commercials, video games, and anime. Yoko has said that she received an offer from Watanabe to compose the music for Cowboy Bebop. However, the project was in early development. The title for the show hadn't even been picked yet, and the only information she had about the show was some early rough sketches of some characters, with Watanabe explaining the music should be jazz. However, there was a bit of a problem. You see, Yoko had no experience or background in jazz. Watanabe knew this already. However, he was so impressed with the range and the types of genres of music she could compose, he believed she had the chops to write the soundtrack. To solve this issue, Yoko was recommended to reach out to Rudy Van Gelder, who agreed to work with her. Rudy had famously recorded and produced some of the most influential jazz albums in the 50s and 60s, including John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, Miles Davis's Walkin' and Cookin' albums, Herbie Hancock's Maiden Voyage, and Lee Morgan's album The Sidewinder. Yoko might not have had any experience in jazz, however the influence of Rudy in the soundtrack for Cowboy Bebop was, very evident. By the time Yoko had finished writing the soundtrack for the show, only 6 or 7 out of 26 episodes had been written. With Yoko explaining in interviews, it was like Watanabe had taken influence from the soundtrack to write the remaining 19 or 20 episodes, and with Watanabe making music videos from the soundtrack itself. There might be some truth in this statement. With Watanabe explaining in interviews, his strength and what makes him different as a director is his love and passion for music. Which brings me to the elements and concepts of what makes the music for Cowboy Bebop. And, before you say it, yes, the soundtrack is jazz. But there's a bit more to it. You see, the soundtrack has influences of different subgenres of jazz, such as cool jazz, hard bop, and bebop. Yes, bebop is a subgenre of jazz. I may not be a connoisseur of anime, but I sure am a connoisseur of jazz. But in addition to this, you also have the influence of blues, rock, country, funk, and even ska and reggae. So the soundtrack itself isn't just jazz, there's a bit more to it. I think more than anything I've noticed with this show, however, is that the music has an influence on even the show's genres, be it tropes of film noir, westerns, kung fu, and of course sci-fi. While people have labelled the genre of the show to be a space noir or a space western, I think the show encompasses much more. In the words of Watanabe, he wanted to create a show that was cool, and you know, putting something into one genre isn't really cool or jazz. Episode Black Dog Serenade, with the scene of Jet running down a dark alleyway. No spoilers is a classic example of what a 1950s film noir film would look like and sound like. The music used in the scene could be a direct one-to-one copy of Miles Davis's first or second quintet for the 1950s with the use of the hum and mute. The sound from the track Farewell Blues has all the traits of the subgenre of jazz called cool jazz. For the non-jazz nerds watching this video, Miles Davis is arguably one of the most influential jazz musicians of all time. His work and art pioneered multiple genres of jazz spanning over 4 decades. In addition, Miles had a knack of being on the cutting edge of emerging genres of jazz and picking musicians and artists to work with to develop and create the sound he wanted. This scene itself does remind me of a French crime noir film from the 50s called Elevated to the Gallows, with the soundtrack famously scored and recorded by Miles in one night. Jazz critics at the time described the music as the loneliest trumpet sound you'll ever hear, and it's been used as a model to write moody and dark music ever since. Richard Brody, a film critic for The New Yorker, wrote in 2016, the soundtrack and score itself is far better than the film. These types of black and white moody films feel like it may have inspired Watanabe when it came to writing this scene, with Yoko explaining previously she had felt that Watanabe had written episodes around her music for the show. And this is no real surprise, to be honest, as Watanabe's explained in interviews he has a preference for American and European films over, say, Japanese movies. With Watanabe's love and knowledge of a range of music, it isn't too hard to see how he linked Yoko's music to movies of different periods of film. With all this, you have a soundtrack that informs one of the most iconic animes of all time. However, what sort of mark or history has the show left on the public? Well, Watanabe has said that the success of Cowboy Bebop was beyond his own expectations. This was because at the time, anime was not all that popular outside of Japan. Cowboy Bebop exploded in the United States in the early 2000s as the very first anime to air on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, with the show experiencing years of rotation on different TV channels after its release. Personally, I was late to the game when it came to Cowboy Bebop, and not really learning about the show until my early 20s when I rocked up to a rehearsal to play the infamous track Tank, to find out that Tank was actually a track from a sci-fi anime with bounty hunters. So when I found out a large portion of the soundtrack was jazz, well, I was hooked. However, a number of my musician friends have told me in the past that Cowboy Bebop was their first introduction to jazz. It got them into jazz and got them into learning an instrument. Yeah, I also think that prior to the 2000s, people's concept of music in sci-fi was written with large orchestras and choirs in the style of John Williams. Yeah, you know, the old dude that wrote the music for Star Wars. Something like Cowboy Bebop's fast up-tempo bebop tracks was something new and fresh, and I wouldn't be surprised if it introduced a whole lot of new people to jazz. With that, I've been Melodic Sound Quest. If you like this type of content, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Helps me grow the channel and helps me make more content like this. In the meantime, thanks for watching and see you, Space Cowboy.